So, before we dive deep into the best and worst of 2023, I wanted to kind of clean out the closet a little bit. I have a lot of albums that I had been listening to throughout the year that I didn't quite have enough to say for a full-length album review, and in the past I would do like a quarter notes or something along those lines, and I'm actually planning about how I'm going to handle these in the new year. But for today's video, I just wanted to get all these out before I dive into the best albums of 2023. So this is a chance for me just to kind of get those out and kind of be done with them. So I've put these in alphabetical order by band so that, I'm not doing any kind of genre separation. I'm not doing any kind of hierarchical, let's talk about the best and we'll talk about the worst. This is just alphabetical by the band. These aren't going to be full-length album reviews. These are just going to be really quick, kind of the thoughts that I had about these albums. And yeah, hopefully it'll be a good time. Hopefully you'll find some other albums that 2023 offered that I didn't get a chance to talk about, because that's kind of why I want to do this, is to let you guys know that 2023 had a lot of great albums and I couldn't cover all of them, but I did my best. So here they are. Beyond Drama by Isles. So Isles is a Chilean progressive metal band. They actually reached out to me back when I was first getting started with their album, I believe it was Hawaii, and I really enjoyed that one. It was kind of a fun prog metal-ish, prog rock piece, and I felt like Beyond Drama kind of continued that and pushed the envelope even a little bit further. You can see that the band has definitely matured over these past couple of years to create something very, very good. It's a little bit tighter, a little bit more succinct. You're not wandering the landscape as much as you have in the past, and I was genuinely surprised about this. This year was in no shortage of great prog rock and prog related bands, and this was kind of one of the better ones. So yeah, if you haven't checked out Isles and you're looking for something a little bit more in the power rock genre, give this one a try. Ausa Prima Materia, I believe that's how you pronounce this. So Ausa is a new one for me. I actually got introduced from Scott in the prog corner about this one, and it's some really good retro prog. I feel like this album kind of leaned a little too heavily on the retro side of things. There was definitely a lot of moments on here that I'm like, okay, we've definitely heard this before. We're not really covering any new ground, and there is a little bit, it's a little rough around the edges, if I'm being perfectly honest, but the music that's being presented, it's still pretty good. And if you are a lover of prog music, then at least give this one a spin. It's got all the tropes, it's got all the things that we come to progressive rock for. So yeah, I don't think you're going to be disappointed with this. It's just, if you're kind of like me and you're looking for a band to push the boundaries, this one knows where the boundaries are and plays very squarely within it. So yeah, it's still a good time, and I would still recommend it for anybody that loves a good prog album. Newman from Acoid. This is some great prog metal. I'm getting flavors of Between the Buried and Me and Devin Townsend, but it's not as aggressive or as sharp as those two bands can be. There's a lot of really tasty moments on this one. There's a lot of really deep nooks and crannies, without it being, as I mentioned, too aggressive in that sense. I do feel as if these guys would kind of benefit a little just for a little bit more breathing space within the really chunky and really hard hitting stuff. But overall, this album was a really fun treat. And again, if you're a fan of progressive metal, you can do a lot worse. I would recommend checking this one out. The Song and Tales of Arioya, I think it is, Book 1, The Chronicles of Father Robin. I've been trying to get into the whole Chronicles of Father Robin in this year. Unfortunately, a lot of it is behind a paywall, and I don't have a whole lot of extra cash floating around at the moment. So, I've only really been able to listen to whatever he's been releasing on streaming services. And the first of the 3 books, this is chapter 1, and you can tell that this is part 1 of a multi-phase story and a multi-phase album. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest, because I hear that the second one might be the best. And I really liked this more unique, more minstrel style of progressive rock, because I do feel as if progressive rock as a whole is either very symphonic retro or very metal, and we don't have a lot of that more menstrual kind of like Genesis style of progressive rock anymore. Like early Genesis, I'm looking at like Trespass and whatnot, like kind of like the Anthony Phillips style of Genesis, you know? And this one definitely itches that scratch for me, you know? It's got lovely textures in it. There's a lot of different layers towards this. And as I mentioned, I'm really excited to listen to more of this project. For those that love this album, they really, really love it, and I totally get it. I'm just looking forward to hearing the rest of it. So yeah, that's where I'm at for this one. Episodes in Oceanography Volume 2 by Chaio, I think is how you pronounce that band's name. Love this one. I've been really deep into the atmospheric music this year, and especially last year. Like, I did a really deep dive into deep sea exploration, specifically reading like 4 or 5 books all within that topic, and I was like, this album was the soundtrack to all of that. And I had a couple more books to read this year about that kind of stuff, because I know there's something about deep sea exploration, especially beyond the Midnight Zone, that I absolutely love. There's something about it that draws me towards it. And this album really is that kind of soundtrack, you know? It's very deep in the ambience. There's a lot of textures within it as well. And even though a lot of it is like aphromorphic, it's very like up in the clouds, like it doesn't perch a whole lot. There's still like these concrete moments, you know? It really is kind of discovering and looking around the landscape and just having these little touchstones every once in a while here and there. And I loved it. I love to put it on just to mellow out, you know. I love to put this on just to kind of take a deep breath and be enriched within the atmosphere. So this one is a definite like recommendation for me. I don't know if those who want something much more immediate, something a little bit more meaty, maybe this one, you know, take with a little bit of a warning sign that this one isn't for everybody, but I've been loving this one and I think you might too. Soft Hell by Closers in Moscow. So Closers in Moscow, I really fell in love with a few years back with their Pink Lemonade album, and Happy Days from that album is one of my favorite songs. Like, I put that on all the compilation albums at that point. And I was really looking forward to something new, you know, something more, because even though I loved even though I loved Pink Lemonade, there wasn't like a lot to come back to outside of Happy Days and a couple other tracks here and there. So yeah, I was looking forward to something new, and this one took a little bit of time to get to us, and I'd rather a band take the time they need in order to create a superior album than to rush it and botch that at the end. And this one, I feel like they succeeded in producing a stand-up album. I like this one a lot more than Pink Lemonade, which is kind of the album that put them on the map. And yeah, I love the funky rock that this album is on. I love how they kind of continued that mythos, you know. This is kind of the music that I was feeling from bands like Bent Knee, which is kind of like the next chapter in rock music. There's a lot more experimentation within it. There's a lot more of like playing with the genre and playing with the tropes, and it's got a lot of funk and a lot of groove towards it as well, which I really, really appreciate. This was one that kept getting me back, and I really loved how tight the musicianship was on this album. If you're looking for like a solid rock album with some inflections of jazz and funk and basically a progressive rock album, this is the one for you. You know, I highly recommend this for you, and I had a great time, and I think you will too. The Loveliest of Times from Rae Jepsen. So Rae Jepsen last year put out The Loneliest Times, and yeah, she usually follows it up with kind of like a companion album. And so, you know, this is basically a companion album. These were songs that were written within The Loneliest of Times kind of sequence that didn't quite feel like they fit within the album itself. And so now we get this whole companion album, and you know what? I almost like this one a little bit more than the original album. The original album, still great, and honestly, the individual songs on there, when the songs hit hard, they hit really hard, and that's what I really appreciate. This one, from start to finish, is a very good album. I think it's a stronger album from start to finish, but it doesn't quite hit those same peaks that the Loneliest Times did. If you're a fan of Carly Rae, you got to check this one out. If you're a fan of pop music that's a little bit more grooving, a little bit more mellow, I think you're going to have a great time with this. You know, it's a little bit of a throwbacks to that 80s kind of pop music with bands like Tiffany, I think is the easiest one to draw a comparison to, because it's just fun. You know, it's fun, it's grooving, it's a little bit more on the mellow side. There's a lot of grooves to it, and I've been loving this one. So yeah, if you're a pop fan, I would check this one out. Celestial Songs by Downs Braide Association. So yeah, this year saw a lot of like legacy bands, specifically within Yes, put out their own albums. I mean, Yes put out Mirror to the Sky, Trevor Rabin put out Rio, and now we have Downs teaming up with Braide to put out Celestial Songs, and it was good. You know, it was good. In my mind, it wasn't really anything to write home about. Like the songs were solid, but I wouldn't necessarily come back to this one as much as I did Mirror to the Sky and Rio. I think out of the three, Rio's probably the best. But there's still a lot of fun new material for this rocker 70s style. Like kind of like that arena rock from like the early 80s. Like I'm looking at Asia and bands such as that. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily write home too much about this one. It was just kind of fun, you know. It reminds me of some of the legacy rockers that came together last year for bands like 6x6, where it's just fun rock music. You know, they're not really challenging the mold too much. It's just kind of there. And yeah, so I mean, if you're a fan of Downs, if you're a fan of Braide, you know, give this one a spin. It might be up your alley. But for me, I don't know, I'd rather give Rio one more spin. Inuktuk by Ellipses, and I really hope that I pronounced those ones right. So Inuktuk is one of the languages within the Northern Aboriginal and First Nations individuals and peoples, specifically here in Canada. And this was a great take on some really classic songs. They're all done in the Inuktuk language, so you have some pretty prominent and very popular songs like Metallica's Enter Sandman, for example, all done within this language. And for a culture that has been, you know, kind of attempted eradication by the government, it's really good that you see this preservation through music, you know. And I think that's, you know, I would always say that music is the great bridger. It's what connects everybody, and I love to hear this music done in this style, in this kind of format. So this one is a great treat, and half the fun is just sitting down and trying to figure out which song it is, because they're all done in this more you know, First Nations people's style. So really like this one. I would highly recommend checking this one out, if nothing else than just to hear the beauty of this language that unfortunately has kind of been lost, you know, and I'm so glad that we're actually getting back to it. So yeah, go and check this one out. It was a great time. I highly recommend it. Genesis by Finter Frost. I think Genesis? Yeah, Genesis. I'll get it eventually. This is some great prog metal, you know, and, you know, definitely leaning a lot more on the brutal side, but man, when this album hits, it hits hard. I really love the symphonic approach to the metal on this album. It's kind of giving me vibes of like a Nightwish or Apocalyptica, or even like a Camelot, but if it was a little bit more brutal, if it had a little bit more teeth to it, a little bit more sophistication, I would also say. And I could see this alienating, you know, the big fans of that type of symphonic metal, but man, the longer stretches of music that are found within here, the build-ups, the payoffs, all a huge treat. And it just makes my proggy heart smile, especially when it loves a good metal breakdown. And man, this album has its fair share of metal breakdowns. So yeah, if you're a fan of the Metalworks and a good brutal prog, then I think you're going to really like this one. So I would check this one out. Giant Sky 2 by Giant Sky. So earlier in this year, I had a look at Giant Sky, which had the debut album, 2 tracks, about 20 minutes long, and that immediately got my attention. And this one, I actually kind of enjoy a little bit more. There's not quite that same length of tracks. There's actually, I think there's like 8 or 9 tracks on here, but they still flow very well within one another. The musicianship and writing styles are much tighter on this one. It's a lot more mature. I can tell that the group has really matured and, took what worked with their debut album and kind of expanded upon that and grown and see where the music can go from here. The music is still, very impressionistic and mellow with those kind of darker undertones that they like to play with. It's not quite as I think fully formed as I feel like they will be in the future, but I am excited to see what they have in the future as well. So if you're looking for some like atmospheric, proggy music, then I think you're going to enjoy this one. I would check it out. Weather Vanes by Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit. I had this on my albums to be listened to for most of the year, and I honestly can't remember why. I sat down and listened to it a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, why did I want to listen to this one? And I have a feeling, one of my followers or fans or whatever had mentioned it to me that I had to check it out, and it's fine, it's fine, but it's not necessarily my cup of tea, it's not really my thing. It's very like indie singer-songwriter without the sophistication or the songwriting ship or the harmonies or like anything that I really enjoy within this kind of a sound, because when I come to this music, I'm looking for like a Decemberists or Murder by Death or more of like a Canadiana, even like Matt Mays or Sam Roberts, but yeah, it didn't quite connect with me. But if you're a fan of like more of the singer-songwriter kind of emphasis more on the indie side of things, maybe give this one a spin. But for me, this one, it didn't really do too much for me. So yeah, that's what I've got for that one. Mind Out of Mind by Kimono. So this was another one that I had on my list for quite a while, and I've been grooving to it pretty much throughout the summer, and I was originally going to include it in my summer big album roundup where I had like 20 albums that I wanted to talk about, but I was like, no. I need a little bit more time with it because there's a lot of nooks and crannies, and I feel like prog is in good hands in the more mainstream side of things with bands like this and Squid and Black Country New Road, because they're all kind of playing around with the same game. They're all playing the same game. Some really fun, funky prog on here that incorporates jazz, incorporates funk, and I was really getting into it, but at the end of the day, there wasn't quite enough to get me back for more. I just felt like it was missing big hooks to get me interested. It was missing those like big harmonies or playing styles or the buildups and payoffs. I'm as I mentioned, I'm super glad that bands like Kimono are starting to get more recognition because I feel like in the music scene, they're much more needed. And I love that they're kind of continuing on this trend and getting that recognition. But yeah, this one didn't quite have enough for me to come back to like Black Country New Road or even the Black Midi does. But still glad to see these guys jamming, and I can't wait to see what they have coming up next. Strings from the Edge of Sound by Carmagmongi, I think is how you pronounce it, Carmagmongi. Mongwai. Anyway, this album is a very interesting and a really good treat. Always near the end of the year, I go to the prog archives and I see what are the best albums of that current year. And this one was rated pretty high up there, and I gave it a spin, and it's tasty, you guys. It's real tasty. I did a little bit of research into this. It looks like they're all reworkings, or at least most of it are reworkings of past tracks, but given a little bit more of an orchestral spin to it. And right there, you got me. It almost makes me want to go back and listen to the originals, but I didn't want to, just because I didn't want it to taint the great sounds that I have on here. If you're looking for that symphonic prog with some really great buildups and really great payoffs, this one's for you. It doesn't necessarily, as I keep saying and feel like a little bit of a broken record for, it doesn't quite break the mold for me. Like it doesn't quite reach those same heights that I was hoping for an album that is rated this high to do. But it knows what it wants to do and it does it very well. So in that case, again, if you're looking for that symphonic retro prog, give this one a spin. I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised. V, or 5, from Lovecraft. So Lovecraft is a new band for me, and I was really getting into these guys back in October because all of their tracks are Halloween or horror themed, and this is their fifth one, and I believe they put out one a year, which is like, what a crazy turnaround for these bands. And this one was great fun. You know, we get so many Christmas albums, you know, I'm got one prominently on display there, but we don't have a whole lot of like Halloween albums, and like my love for Christmas and Halloween are practically here and here, you know, like only right now do I love Christmas more than Halloween because I'm right in the middle of the Christmas spirit, but back in October, Halloween was my favorite, you know, so it kind of goes back and forth, but I don't really have Halloween albums to celebrate the season like I do have Christmas albums. So I'm glad to see that Lovecraft is coming up and filling that void, and they've got some huge and fun tracks on there. So if you're, it's basically like fun pop rock, you know, like it's almost like if you took Kids Bop and removed the kids and just put on some really fun guest on there. That's essentially what you've got on this, but they're all circling around the Halloween theme. So I would recommend this one probably starting in September next year. You know, listening to these kinds of tracks on this album at this time it feels a little disjointed, but you know, I can see this hitting hard once the colors of the trees start to change. So give this one a spin next year because I think this will be our good time. Jenny of Thebes by the Mountain Goats. So I've always kind of kept my finger on the pulse for the Mountain Goats. I've never been a huge fan of theirs, but I've always kind of, you know, it's kind of like those big indie darling bands that I know a lot of my people my age love, that I always kind of just keep my eyes out for. And, you know, this album is fine. You know, it's the typical nerd rock, the typical indie rock that we've come to expect from the Mountain Goats. It's more of the same from John and the rest of the boys. The lyrics are a delight, and that's why I come to the Mountain Goats. But the music is pretty much, you know, I don't want to say cruise control, but there wasn't like a whole lot on here to differentiate it from any other Mountain Goats album. So yeah, it's one of those, like, if you want more of the same, then you're going to have a great time with this one, but don't really expect anything too far away from center. Celebrants from Nickel Creek. So this was another one that was introduced to me from my kind of like prog group that I've kind of amassed here on YouTube, because I know Nathan on Shuffle has been loving this album, and I am a fan of bluegrass. You know, I will listen to the odd bluegrass here and there, and this one was fun. You know, this was a lot of fun. If I had to say one of the reasons why I didn't come back to this as often as I probably would have is the length of the album. It's a little much, you know. I feel like they could have either released this in 2 parts or something along those lines, because it's a lot of time to spend with this kind of music. But that being said, I love the harmonies on this album. That is really where this album shines. I love the fiddle. I love the banjo. I love all those bluegrass tropes. And what they're doing with it is just a delight for the ears. So if you're a fan of bluegrass, if you're a fan of more folk-infused music, then you got to give this one a try. You got to give this one a listen. But for me, I was like, okay, that's fun. That's fine. I gave it a couple spins, and I'm like, yeah, I got what these guys are putting down. So yeah, that's what I've got for that one. Every Sound Has a Color in the Valley of Night, Part 1 by Night Versus. So this one came out pretty early on in my kind of sitting down to construct this album, like this big video that I'm doing. And we've got some really great instrumental prog metal. You know, it never really goes right into the straight up brutality that a lot of this kind of instrumental metal can get to, but it always kind of is shifting and shaking and moving around. You know, it doesn't quite have those blast beats, and we don't have those like screaming our balls off moments just because there's no vocals, but it is very, very meaty. It's very, very immediate in that sense as well. It does have some really intense moments, so just because it doesn't have those blast beats or those gent drops or anything like that doesn't mean they can't find ways to be brutal, you know? And that's one of the things that I really particularly enjoy about this album is the ways that they find the brutality within the confines of their music. That's a really good treat, and that's what really made me come back to. And I also really appreciate that they're not just up at 11 the entire time. Again, the instrumental metal pieces can be brutal, it can be nerve-wracking, it can just be like intense 100% of the time, and it feels like your brain is in a blender. And, you know, sometimes I need that. Sometimes I love that, but most of the time, I need those peaks and valleys. I need those contrasts. And this album gives that to me. So yeah, if you're a fan of progressive metal and specifically in the instrumental vein, I would give this one a try. If you're somebody that needs vocals just for some kind of a touchstone, maybe enter this one with, you know, a little bit of hesitancy. But yeah, this is still one that I would recommend. The Lightmaker by Nine Skies. So Nine Skies really made a splash a couple of years ago with their one album, and I think it was just like a numeric album. Like I think it was like 19, 26, 42 or something along those lines. And yeah, this one was, I wanted to love it more. I really, really did. And this is a classic example of being a really great start for an album and like having the first half of this album be so strong and so good, and then kind of tripping over their own feet by the end of it, which is a shame because the last two tracks on this are both within 11 minutes. So yeah, like this is some great classic rock prog. And I am saddened that I missed it throughout the year. Like I really would have liked a little bit more time with this album. But if you're looking for the capital rock in progressive rock, then this is one for you. And I do feel as if, you know, progressive rock has kind of lost the footing of the ball when it comes to rock music. You know, you either have progressive symphonic rock or progressive metal, but you don't have like that classic rock. And I feel like Nine Skies takes the ball and run with it. Unlike, say, some of the other bands like Kimono or Closers in Moscow, which kind of has that funky infusion found within it, this doesn't have that at all. It's straight up rock. So yeah, I just wish that the second half was just stronger than the first half, or at least as strong. You know, I would take just as strong. Yeah, it's just it doesn't have that same kind of teeth, that same kind of energy, that same kind of vibe. But man, that first half, I would just recommend, you know, sitting down and listening to those first four tracks. At least get those under your belt because they are a great treat. Salvage Enterprise by the Polyphonic Spree. I was shocked to see more music being put out by the Polyphonic Spree, if I'm honest, you know, back in November. The only reason why I knew about this was because I was looking for music to put onto my latest Christmas playlist, and one of my favorite Christmas albums was the one they put out like 10 years ago or something. Their rendition of Do You Hear What I Hear, that bleeds right into The Little Drummer Boy, is one of the best Christmas moments that I can think of. And yeah, I was like, okay, well, let's put this on. And while I was on their Spotify page, I was like, wait a minute, they have a new album out? And it came out a couple weeks ago? What is this? So I approached it with hesitancy because their last full-length album of original material, Yes, It's True, was a dud for me. You know, it didn't do anything for me. And because I loved In the Beginning Stages, Together We're Heavy, and The Fragile Army, like those three albums are some of the best music that I've heard, specifically within the symphonic rock genre. I was really let down by Yes, It's True. But yeah, I came to Salvage Enterprise with cautious optimism, you know, and I guess a lot of that had to do with not having this big buildup of expectation because I found it. I'm like, I had no idea this existed. Let's give it a try. It's very mellow. It's very soft, you know, and one of the reasons why I came to the Polyphonic Spree was their big sound. You know, it's the Polyphonic Spree. And coming into this album, and it's very mellow, it's very somber, you still have that kind of orchestral soundscapes to it, but it's much more in like a pastoral, very pastel landscape kind of a vibe without those big crescendos. I can't really say I was let down because I came with lower expectations, and I will be honest, I like it a lot more than Yes It's True, because at least this feels a lot more genuine. It was fine. And there were, I think, 3 tracks on this entire album that I was like, okay, I'll come back to this one. But other than that, it was just kind of somber, mellow, introspective music. That's fine. And I'm okay with that kind of music, but I was just really hoping and really waiting for that big crescendo song. I was really waiting for that big oomph that I know that Polyphonic Spree is capable of. But as it is here, it's kind of forgettable. So if you're new to Polyphonic Spree, check out Together We're Heavy and The Fragile Army. Those 2 records alone are enough to get you satisfied. I would only come back to this one if you've digested the rest of their discography. Maybe leave Yes It's True to the side, and get to this one a little bit later on. Other Doors by Soft Machine. So I got really into Soft Machine back in the summer just to kind of prepare for this, because I saw that it was making waves. I saw that it was coming out, and I'm like, I've never actually sat down and listened to Soft Machine. And, 3rd and 4th, I know were like huge prog albums back in the day. So I got to listen to it. I'm like, yeah, it's long music that doesn't actually go anywhere, Like, I'm a huge fan, as you all should know by now, of longer stretches of music, but part of the reason why I'm a big fan of that is because most of the time there's a destination. Most of the time there's a big buildup that happens within it, and I just never felt it with Soft Machine. And the case can be said about this one as well. Like, the same tropes and the same vibes are felt on this one. It's chill, it's atmospheric, it's very impressionistic. It's kind of like an abstract painting. What you bring to it, it was what gives back to you. So if you are in for this and you bring a lot to it, you're going to get a lot out of it. But if you come to this expecting it to be immediate, to be, solid right off the get-go, to have a very firm foundation, you're going to be let down. But I also can't imagine just a passive listener coming to this album. I feel like it's going to be fans of the band, and I can't see too many of them being overly disappointed with this one. With that being said, the common listener, maybe check out something else. It's still fine and it's still fun, but I don't know. This wasn't one that I came back to pretty regularly. Spelling and the Mystery School by Spelling. So last year or the year before, Spelling put out a brilliant album. It was one of my favorite albums of the year. It's what really, it was another album that really got me into the more ethereal art rock of today, and I absolutely loved it. So when I found out that Spelling has put out another album, but it was much more of like reworkings and recontextualizing of past material, I got excited, and it seems as though this one is much more incorporating her own band within this, and I really appreciate that. Now, not all of the songs here are bangers, and I can't necessarily say that all of them are improvements from the original, but I really love what she's doing within this. As I mentioned, she's recontextualizing it. It's bringing in the band as well. Like, there's a lot more of her and the band rather than the band kind of elevating her. At this point, it feels like she's elevating the band. And yeah, it's really good. This would also be a really good entry point to Spelling's music. So if you've never heard anything from Spelling before, give this one a shot. I think, what is it, Schoolboys or Boys from School? One of the best art rock tracks ever. So if nothing else, give that one a spin. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to see whatever Spelling has in store next, now that she's, stretching her legs a little bit. And I feel like this is more of an exercise rather than an album, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I would check it out if you haven't before. A Poetry of Rain by Subsignal. So Subsignal is a new band for me within the retro prog outfit, and I was originally going to do a full-length album review for this, but I just couldn't find enough to say. I don't want to say this is just generic symphonic retro prog, because I think it's a little bit more than that. You know, they are playing with a little bit more of sophistication within this, but on the same vein, there wasn't a whole lot to distinguish them from a lot of the retro prog that I was listening to this year. I was really kind of hoping for some meaty essences within it. I was really hoping for some oomph, but from where we are here, I don't know, I was just kind of hoping for a little bit more. But it was still a good time, and I can see like anybody that's kind of new to the genre having a really, really good time with this. Like, I think this is a great entry point. It's quite accessible, like right from the get-go, and I like the little bit more of like the jazzy approach that these guys take. So if any of that fits your bill, I would highly recommend this one. But if you're looking for, you know, the next big sound within the retro prog side of things, I would look elsewhere. The Weight of the Mask by Svalbard, and I believe that's how you pronounce it. Yeah, if you want some heavy metal within your progressive metal, then you need to check these guys out. I love how aggressive this one is. I love how intense this one is. There's a lot of, you know, that intensity, that oomph that I love. If you're into, as I mentioned before earlier in this big roundup, Between the Buried and Me and Devin Townsend, or, you know, something like even Animals as Leaders at moments, you gotta check this one out. It's aggressive, it's intense, and I love this style of death, like technical death metal. Yeah, I do. The only thing that I would say about this one is I do wish that there were a little bit more buildups and payoffs rather than them just playing at 11 the entire time. But that being said, you can do a lot worse within the progressive tech metal, because even though it doesn't necessarily feel all that generic, there's definitely their own signature sound to it. Yeah, I was just wishing that there was a little bit more buildups and payoffs. So yeah, if any of that speaks to you, I would check this one out. And honestly, if you are a fan of the brutal tech death prog, give this one a spin. I think you'll really enjoy it. From a Fading World by Rubber Tree. So yeah, this is very similar to a lot of that funky, jazzy, progressive rock. Squeaky Feet was one that I reviewed earlier this year, and I had a lot of fun. It's kind of all over the place. It never really sits still. It almost feels like the music for ADHD in certain cases. You know, if you love your music with an ever-shifting landscape, if you like your music that never really solidifies all that much, then I think you're really, really going to love this one. I love the interplay between all the musicians. You know, you can feel like these guys have been playing for quite a while, and they know all of the itches and all the different like signals for one another, because man, do they ever play extremely tight. I would love to see these guys play live, honestly. I think that would be a lot of fun. Yeah, overall, this was quirky, this was fun, it's got a bit of jazz, it's got a bit of funk in it, and this is just a great place for that kind of very happy sounding, funky prog. And I also love the fact that all these songs bleed together to create almost a singular piece of music in that sense, you know? And it just, I don't know, it made me smile. I think you can do a lot worse with this style of music, and I had a ball with it, so I would check it out. In the World of Christmas, from Tales from the Sky. Christmas, I think, is the actual word. Yeah, this is a great, big, epic prog piece. Lots of fun playing styles on this one. And in a year where so many new bands have come out of the woodworks, this was another one that happened to do so. You know, I wouldn't necessarily completely write this one off, even though I would say that these guys don't add a whole lot to the landscape that other bands aren't already bringing. But still, it's got a lot of energy. It's got a lot of oomph towards it. You can tell that the band is hungry. And that's what I really love. The energy is vibing. The songwriting ship is at least a little bit on the unique side in this one. I would give this one a spin, but also know that, you know, if you throw a penny anywhere, you're going to hit 2 or 3 bands that are very similar to these guys. But as I mentioned, I wouldn't write them off completely. I would give them a spin and just see, maybe this one's for you. You know, maybe it's for you. Okay, going like a complete 180 degrees, we've got 1989 Taylor's version from Taylor Swift. So you guys know that Taylor Swift is re-recording a lot of her older albums, and I'm not going to get into it here. I've basically talked about all of them, and 1989, along with Reputation and Red, are my 3 favorite records from Taylor Swift. I love what she was doing with all those albums, and I know that for some people, with these new releases, up to this point, most people would say that her version is the superior version, and this is the only one that didn't really bring a whole lot to the table in terms of mixing, mastering, or doing anything new. I don't necessarily see that. I actually really enjoyed the mixing on this one. I loved what they were doing. Sure, it's not quite as aggressive as, say, the Fearless Taylor version was, but I don't think 1989 really is supposed to be that big oomph, you know? Yeah, sure, she's working with a lot more of her folky friends rather than her pop friends within the mixing and mastering, but I don't know, I kind of like the more organic feel. I like that it's not all processed in that sense. I also really like what they're doing with the stereo mix on this that wasn't found within the original mixing, especially within the drums. Like once the drums hit from Welcome to New York, where it's kind of going back and forth between the channels, I thought it was a good time. It has some of my favorite tracks on here, and I'm getting more and more excited for Reputation. Because if she brings someone with some metal background on that album, I think we're in for a really big treat. And some of the tracks from the Vault are also really great. You know, I've been listening to a lot of those pretty much on repeat since it came out. So if you're a fan of Taylor Swift, you've already checked this one out. If you've heard 1989, the original version, you know, this is going to be for me the definitive version. And it's a great treat. Absolutely a great treat. Enduring Spirit by Tomb Mold. So, man, this year was a great time for metal music, and specifically progressive metal music. This one was a lot of fun. It hits it hits the ground running and never relents. You know, this was intense from start to finish. This was one of those bands or albums that, unlike some ones where I'm like, okay, let's have some variations. You know, let's get a little bit of differentiations in this one. Once you hear the first song, you know what you're in for the rest of the album. There's very little variations, and when you're in that mood, that is exactly what you want. I wish, you know, if I could say anything about this one, and that's what I'm doing right now, I just wish there was a little bit of variations. I wish that there was some peaks and valleys. I wish that there was some buildups and payoffs, but man, yeah, if you're in for that aggressive, always at 11 all the time music, then you're really going to love this one. If not, I can see this one being a little much. I think it might be a little much, but yeah, Tomb Mold put out another great album, so that's all you need to know. Hastehoven by Tuskmark, I believe is how you pronounce it, Tuskmark. Yeah, this one felt straight out of the 70s, like very hippie 70s rock music. I was transported right back to that late 60s, early 70s kind of a vibe. And if you had told me that this came out in like 1974 or so, I would have believed you. I'd have been like, yep, checks out, makes sense, I get it. And because of that, there isn't really anything all that new or all that original on this album, or, you know, nothing's really all that groundbreaking. It's just a lot of very fun, very hippy-dippy style of music. And if you're into that and you want more of it, then this album was made for you. But if you need something that's a little bit more new, something that hasn't been played 1,000 times before, maybe shy away from that. So yeah, I would recommend this one if you're looking more for like that 70s rock style of fix, especially for more of that like Flower Child style of things. Yeah, I would give this one a spin. Infinity, 25th anniversary from Devin Townsend. So, yeah, there's a 25th anniversary edition of Infinity, and I believe that Devin had actually gone through and re-recorded this, very similar to what Taylor Swift was doing. And honestly, like, this is a great companion album for the original. I love some of the mixes, some of the things that he's doing on this one, you know, and some of the big tracks that we've known and loved that's come from this one. I mean, he's already done this with Truth, which opens up this album, a couple of times before. And I really love this one. You know, I know that it's not necessarily everybody's favorite. Like most people, when they think of like the classic Devin Townsend albums, they're looking at like the Ocean Machine, or like a track like that. And I feel like Infinity is one that's a little bit more rough around the edges. I mean, at least it's not Physicist in that case. But, you know, I like that this was much more of like a Devin expression. You know, and I feel like he's definitely doing it here in a little bit more of a modern edge. You know, he's got a little bit more of an advancement of technology within the mixing and the mastering, and he's definitely utilizing that to his full advantage. So, yeah, if you're a fan of Devin, I would highly recommend this one. If you felt like Infinity could have used a little bit of a cleanup, definitely give this one a shot. I think that this one was a great addition to the Devin Townsend discography. The Cycle Undone by the 20 Committee. This was a fun, eclectic prog. You know, I feel like I don't get a lot of this style of prog in my day-to-day listenings, and it's a little bit of a shame because I really, really love it. It kind of reminds me of like really early tangent music from Andy Tillison, or some of the things that like Motorcycle was doing in their more impressionistic mellow style of music. I would highly recommend this one. I do wish that I had a little bit more time with it just because of how much nooks and crannies there are within it. Like there's a lot of layering, there's a lot of stuff going on, and yeah, this one definitely gets the note seal of approval. So yeah, I would definitely give this one a spin. You know, the first handful of tracks alone are enough to worth the price of admission for it. So yeah, go and check this one out. I would really, really recommend this one. Moving forward for Vamussery. Vamussery reached out to me to review their album. Moose are my favorite animal. Absolutely love moose. I have moose memorabilia everywhere and anywhere. You know, whenever anybody is trying to figure out a gift to give me for like Christmas or my birthday, give me something that's moose related and I'm a happy person. Love this one from beginning to end. You know, I had a lot of fun with this one. It reminds me of a lot of the rock music that we're getting nowadays, especially kind of within the trend of the 2020s. You know, and I'm really, really digging this. There's, again, nothing too groundbreaking with this one. There's not a whole lot that are breaking the mold in that case, but there's some really amazing rock music that's found within this. And I've been digging it a lot. So if you're looking for something new, something fun, something to just kind of jam around to that's in the rock vein, give this one a spin. I actually really highly recommend this one. Fearless in Love by Voyager. So these ones were making a splash within the Eurovision because I think they were one of the finalists, and I love the fact that they're bringing progressive metal to a wider stage. And I know a lot of my contemporary music reviewers in the prog sphere are like really loving this one. It didn't really do too much for me, if I'm being honest. It felt a little bit too much like a metal version of the 80s arena rock from Asia and bands such as that. And I don't know, I felt like with so much metal music that was so good this year, a album that was just all right for me wasn't one that I wanted to spend a whole lot of time with. Now, if you're a fan of that fun arena rock metal style of music, I think you're going to get a really a lot out of this, and this will be definitely a lot more up your alley than it was for mine. But I was just looking for a little bit more, I don't know, like it felt like they were compromising because they were doing so much in terms of genre blending that I wish that they had either done a little bit more metal or a little bit more prog or a little bit more arena rock. And I felt like as they're trying to straddle all three, I felt like they were sacrificing some of the elements that made those genres special. But I still know that this band is occurring a massive following, and I applaud them for it. And I am glad to see that these guys are getting the recognition that they deserve. And I hope that this opens the door for more bands like them to take center stage. So Yeah, this was one that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but I also know because of how many people are already digging it, I'm not losing any audience for that. So, yeah, that's what I've got. Finally, we come to the last one of For the Good of the Realm by Wield and Woo. I was getting into so much metal this year. Like, this year was the year of metal for me. And I absolutely love this. I was captivated immediately by the front cover. Like the album cover of this album was just a delight. Like, I love that pre-Raphaelitian motifs within it, and the metal music that is found within it is just stuff to, I feel like I'm getting a big old hug with it. You know, it's aggressive, it's intense, it has a little bit of a black metal feel within it without being overly aggressive and overly sharp in that sense. It's polished without being overly too shiny. It's raw without it being too grating. This was a great record. You know, if you're a fan of that really heavy metal, I would highly recommend giving this one a spin. I think you'll have a great time. And that's it. That's all 35 albums. Albums that I had listened to throughout the year that I didn't have enough to talk about for a full-length album review. Which means I can finally sit down and get my best albums of the year out. So look forward to that coming out next week. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload the 20 albums, the 20 best albums of 2023 on Tuesday, and then Thursday will be my most surprising and most disappointing albums of the year, just as kind of a follow-up. And then we start the new year, and, you know, I think I'm going to put out another video just kind of saying how I'm thinking about changing some things up, you know, just so I don't have another video like this that's as long as this is, covering all the albums that I missed throughout the year. So that all being said, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been a blast. I cannot wait to talk about my top 20 albums of the year, and I really hope you guys will check that one out next week. So, as always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.